Thank you for this invitation, the chance to talk to quite specialized audience for this very demanding matter. So, today we will talk more specifically on LNG bunkering standards and operational procedures. What we are going to see here is the outcome, the results, what we have learned from real practice, from an exercise and support that we have provided as Lloyd's Register to Singapore Maritime Port Authority in delivering this standard procedure. So, a bit of history. So, it is quite a big dilemma now with LNG, but have we ever been there before? I'm just referring here to the survey report by Chief Engineer John Milton back in 1912 on board the Selandia, the first diesel-engined vessel. And Mr. Milton mentions that engines will give equal satisfaction in regular running, and if this anticipation is realized, there is no doubt that many oil engine vessels will be built for trading in parts where fuel oil can be regularly obtained. So, back 100 years ago, we had almost the same situation with diesel engine vessels. So, getting into the gist of the problem, we have seen a number of risks that required assessment before LNG bunkering could materialize. So these risks were associated with the vessels themselves, the location, personnel involved, the equipment used, the environment, of course, emergency planning and contingencies with the focus on the properties of LNG, and of course the regulations. The goal has been to create standards that address the entire gas bunkering supply chain in a holistic manner. So, what are the tools that have come up since today, so far, from this LNG as fuel effort? We have an ISO technical specification for LNG bunkering. It is a draft version, but it is something that is being developed. We had an LNG ship-to-ship LNG bunkering procedure from the Swedish Marine Technology Forum, even though in this case we must care about the scale factor. This was referring to small transshipments of LNG bunkering. We have what we will see today, the Singapore Maritime Port Authority LNG bunkering standards and procedures. And we recently had something that is quite related to ship-to-ship and LNG bunkering, the Ship-to-Ship Transfer Guide for Petroleum Chemicals and Liquefied Gases, which also refers to LNG. So, we had to deal with a number of challenges. Challenge number one, introducing gas as a shipping fuel. We had a complete lack of prescriptive requirements for this cause. So, what did we do? We developed the new LR classification rules for natural gas fuel ships. We also developed a new LR risk assessment methodology for novel technology and designs of this kind and other kinds as well. And we're closely working with IMO in developing and finalizing the IGF code. What we need to say here is that we must see that for LNG as fuel, we have a twofold approach. We don't use only prescriptive rules, we will also use a detailed methodology for risk assessment in practice. Challenge number two, introducing the receiving ship. So I'm going to be a bit fast on this. Again, we had lack of prescriptive requirements. Crew competency was lacking as well. The new emergency shutdown philosophy had to be implemented, and we had also new fire safety requirements. So what did we do? We introduced the classification rules, the risk assessment methodology, a technical specification for receiving ships, a new proposed fire safety requirement standards, and of course a bunkering operational procedure, a complete one. On challenge number 3, we had to do with the bunker ship, the lack of compatibility with the receiving ship, and the need to manage gas bunkering safety. We also developed a technical specification for this. We proposed the fire safety requirement standard, a bunkering operational procedure, and we also implemented something that is quite familiar for those involved in ship-to-ship, but not yet mentioned in LNG bunkering and bunkering in general, the person in overall advisory control for bunkering gas. So, what we had to deal as well was the new bunkering locations and the sizes and the simultaneous operations that we had to deal with. The gaps were to ensure the location safety, to deal with emergency and contingencies, and to ensure public safety, keeping in mind what is in proximity of the whole bunkering operation. So we had to set risk acceptance criteria and calculate exclusion zones based on these criteria. We had to set up new emergency operational procedures, and we had also, very important, to set up a new crew competence and awareness standard. So one other gap, one other link missing was the introduction of new equipment specifically for LNG on board the vessels. So you will see the new skids and the new kind of hose handling cranes specially developed for LNG as fuel. We had a complete lack of international standards on these aspects, and we had the need for safe emergency planning to be considered for each system. We developed an approval scheme dedicated to this equipment, an approval scheme for novel equipment for gas bunkering at sea and on land, and we also work with port authorities, IMO, ISO, on standards that need to be developed on this kind of equipment. Of course, something that has been mentioned again and again, the human factor, is quite crucial for LNG bunkering. We need to keep in mind that we will have people that are not aware of gas, they have never worked with gas, and they will have to be involved in bunkering operations for quite significant volumes of LNG. So we had a complete lack of competency standards for gas bunkering for all bunker tankers crew, receiving ships crew, and bunker terminals. And we have a lack of standards for gas bunkering suppliers and personnel. So what we had to do was to create a complete syllabus from scratch, getting the lessons from the gas industry, and on top of that, create a new continuous competency management system for those people involved in this kind of operations. On the procedures aspect, we had the bunkering operational procedures themselves, with a lack of guidance of what to include in a safe and practical gas bunkering operational procedure, but also the complete lack of a standard in what is international practice accepted for LNG bunkering. So we had to create all this from scratch using the gas industry experience, the ship-to-ship experience, and take into account all the factors that are involved in this chain. The bunker tanker, the receiving ship, compatibility issues, checklists, safety and emergency planning, and all procedures alongside. Last but not least, on the challenges side, quantity and quality. We have a quite new world with LNG as far as quality and quantity control is concerned. What has been mentioned already, and we need to keep in mind, is that LNG must be measured by its calorific equivalent. We mean its energy and not its volume or its mass. And of course, since we said that there is a possibility of boil-off being produced, we need a methodology to also take that boil-off into account. So we had a new LNG quantity measurement procedure, which is based on what is used for LNG trades. And we had to propose the use of mass flow meters for supply and vapor return lines in order to also take into account any boil-off. So, some other commercial viability challenges for port authorities in setting up LNG bunkering is to have, we need an accreditation procedure and standard for the gas supplier. We need to have in mind that different ship types require quite different bunkering locations and arrangements, variety of bunkering solution and flexibility. We need to keep in mind that the time to bunker gas should not exceed the time to bunker fuel oil if we need to be competitive. The custody transfer system for when there is vapor return without C-type bunker ships is also quite a concern. The land regulations that may apply to some bunkering locations, and the fact that being too prescriptive will have a terrible constraint in materializing LNG bunkering operations. So, what we have seen altogether so far was we had to set up the prescriptive rules from scratch. We had to set up a detailed design risk assessment methodology for all the operational and design aspects. We had to set up competence standards for personnel involved in this. We had to set up quantity and quality procedures and standards. And of course, we had to see the whole setting of procedures alongside and the bunkering procedure as a distinct ship-to-ship transshipment. Something quite fresh, since we're talking about LNG bunkering. Back in 2011, we had a bunkering survey on ports. Last Monday, we had the publication of the new bunkering infrastructure survey. What we need to keep here is that it seems that for many ports around the world, global major ports, the issue of whether LNG bunkering is feasible from safety aspects is becoming a smaller concern. And what we're talking about now is that ports, they don't need standard infrastructure, fixed infrastructure in order to cover LNG bunkering needs. And what their main concern now is more commercial concerns with regard to the availability and pricing of LNG. We have seen all this, let's say, all this trend to materialize in Europe and the US. The US have more improved financials for LNG, but in Europe we have quite a political support for LNG, with the EU introducing a new alternative fuels directive for supporting alternative fuels and including LNG. We had a number of projects, as you can see, that have already gained funding from the Trans-European Network mechanism in Europe, and many of our colleagues up in the north are working on this, while we also had our chance, and this is quite good news, because it's the first time Greece, along with Cyprus and Italy, have made a proposal in the Trans-European Networks framework, and we are quite optimistic. It is a Greek proposal. We have all been together in this. It is with the support of Lloyd's Register, but it is Hellenic Lloyd's that has been used in this case and has given all the support. The whole consortium includes a number of Greek companies, as you can see. We're all together in this, and we're very optimistic for the future and for LNG in our region as well. Thank you very much.